Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Shop Talk from the Creative Writing and Film program at Stony Brook. We're glad you could join us for this. We've got an event today that I think will be really great for people who are curious about literary magazines. What are they? Why do we have them? And we've got three really amazing editors-in-chief who will be sharing their thoughts about these magazines with us and telling us a little bit about their own magazines. And I'm going to ask each one to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they love about the work they do. And we'll start with Rachel. If you could tell us a little bit about Epiphany and yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Rachel Lyon, and this is Epiphany. I brought 2 issues. This one is my first issue as editor-in-chief. So it just came out in the fall/winter 2019. This was the issue before, which came out last summer, our 15th anniversary issue. So I'm relatively new to the job. It has not been a full year yet, so I'm still kind of getting my sea legs, but I'm very excited about the work so far. And our next issue is coming out this June. It's the Borders issue, so it's a theme issue. It's going to be great.
Borders of countries?
Yeah, we're sort of defining it broadly. So in some ways it was a response to the crisis at the US-Mexico border, but it's turned into a much more sort of broad and philosophical theme.
Fantastic. And tell us something you love about Epiphany, what drew you to working for this magazine.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I love is how thick every issue is. It comes out twice a year, and there's always 20 contributors, sometimes more. So we really do a hefty and beautiful print journal. We also publish online as well, and I love that. So it's been around for a while. It was started back in 2001, 2002, when our founder was teaching at NYU. But since then, it's become independent. It actually wasn't related to NYU for very long before becoming totally independent. So we have no affiliation with any graduate program or anything like that. It's a 501c3, which is great. So we have a board. The structure of it is really sort of unique, and I love that there's this sort of rich history of publishing works in translation. So we always do some work in translation in every issue.
Fantastic. Thank you, and happy birthday, Rachel.
Thank you.
How does it feel to have your birthday in a pandemic?
It's weird. Yeah.
And someone whose birthday just was 2 weeks ago, Ed, tell us a little bit about the weirdness of your birthday and more to the point, the wonderfulness of Guernica.
Yeah, so my name's Ed Winstead. I'm the editor-in-chief of Guernica magazine, or Guernica magazine. People swing both ways on that. It's fun to see who goes which way. I think I lucked out because my birthday was like deep enough into the pandemic that it was just kind of normal at that point. If it was like the first week, I think it would have been very off-putting. But Guernica is now, we're in our 15th year. We're a digital-only magazine, so I don't have anything to show you. You can just go to guernicamag.com if you're curious. We sort of straddle the line between a general interest magazine and a literary magazine. So we sort of have one foot in each camp. We publish fiction and poetry, but we also do sort of general interest magazine reporting and personal essays and a wide variety of other stuff, which is part of what I love about the magazine. I've only been editor-in-chief for 8 or 10 months now, since late last summer. But I've been at Guernica for something like 8 years now, 7 or 8 years. I lose track. And I think that sort of dual nature gives us an eclecticism that I really like, that I've always admired about the magazine, an ability to take things that kind of exist outside of the realm of either a literary magazine or a traditional general interest magazine and find a place for them, which I think is really, really wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Emily, I don't know when your birthday is, so I can't comment on that. But tell us about TSR, the Southampton Review.
Hi, my name is Emily Smith Gilbert, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Southampton Review. I think this is my second year, but I've been working on it since 2014 in some fashion. So this is a copy of our winter-spring 2020 issue. We were founded in 2007. We are affiliated with Stony Brook Southampton's MFA program. So one of the things I love about working on the Southampton Review is I teach the practicum in publishing and editing. So it's a really great way to teach revision as far as your creative writing goes to students who are interested in working on a literary journal, and learning the process of editing, and also reading submissions that we get to the general submissions pile. It's really illuminating for your own writing. So I really enjoy being able to teach. And also we publish a lot of artwork in every issue, and we're full color, which is very exciting. So what that means is we can place the artwork wherever we want. So in a previous issue, this story is called The Air of the World. And it has a fan in it. So we put a picture of a fan next to it. And then in this issue also, we have Rachel Lyon's story, Paper Dancers. And you don't really realize until like more toward the end, this picture of a small girl, how it relates to the story, but it really does. So we get to do that, which is a lot of fun. So that's why I like TSR.
Fantastic. Thank you. So before we get deeper into how you found Rachel's story and decided to publish it and questions like that, it would be great to hear your general thoughts on literary magazines themselves. Why do we have them? What role do they play for writers and for students who are interested in working on one, or volunteers, you know? So let's start with you, Ed, because you were working with Guernica, not Guernica, before you took on the role of editor-in-chief. So what is it about a literary magazine that made you contribute your time to that? What is it doing?
I mean, I am also a writer myself. I have an MFA in fiction. So I've always been involved from the writer's side of things, and I've always found them important for that reason. More broadly, I think literary magazines, you know, they could be sort of shunted to the side and relative to popular culture as sort of niche, you know, heady ivory tower institutions. I don't think that's really true. I don't think that's an accurate representation of what they are, the function that they serve. I think that they are really at the cutting edge of sort of narrative culture, that things that are happening in literary magazines are where you look to see what will be happening on television and in films, you know, 5-10 years from now. They are bellwethers of what we're worried about, what we're thinking about. And in that way, I think they're a really important reflection of like a national artistic psyche. So, you know, on the one hand, I think we're all aware that there's a relatively small, you know, in the context of American or global culture more broadly, audience for literary magazines relative to like Netflix or something like that. But it's still quite a large group of people, and an important group of people, and people who are really invested in it. I think we have a sense of fatalism around this now because the internet gives us access to everything so immediately. But I mean, I think this has always been the case, that it's always been sort of a niche. But that doesn't make it less valuable. I don't mean to sound negative. I just kind of want to address like the elephant in the room right up front. I think they're important because stories are important, because the things that people want to talk about are important. And it's an opportunity to pick up any literary magazine. It's an opportunity to see into the concerns and worries and thoughts of another person, and that's always an engaging and interesting thing.
Yeah, thanks. Pick up, Rachel, you were kind of nodding. I'm curious if that bellwether aspect that literary magazines kind of show us what's on our minds culturally and literarily. Is that what resonated with you? What would you add to that understanding?
Yeah, that does resonate with me. I think that was beautifully said. I was, just to sort of build on that, I was thinking about how short the publication schedule is for a literary journal compared to, say, the publication schedule for a book, which can often take a couple of years to come out, or like a Netflix show, like you mentioned. Where, our publication schedule is about half a year long. So when we're, as I said, we've got this Borders issue coming out, which felt very politically relevant when we came up with it back in the fall or the winter. Now that we're in another crisis, it feels a little bit less relevant, but we're still accepting work for publication in June. I sent out an acceptance just a couple of days ago. So it is possible to publish work that feels incredibly relevant and incredibly contemporary in a literary journal, which I think is part of what makes them so exciting. I think that's true.
Yeah, Emily, what would you add to that? And what was your draw as a young writer toward literary magazines?
Yeah, I think it is always possible that you have a novel as a writer that is ready to go to an agent and then be bought and be published. That happens, but I think as a young writer without a novel, it really was literary journals that if you have a short story or a poem or an essay, like that is one of the places where you go to kind of get your name out there and begin building your publication history. So I think they're important in terms of also being kind of the starting place for a lot of emerging writers or debut writers. And that is one of my other favorite things about working on them is not everyone can get an MFA, not everyone can, go to college and study English or creative writing. But if you have a story and or an essay or a poem, and there is something there, you submit it to a literary journal, the right editor sees it, and they will work with you on it. And that's something that if submissions are free, then you don't have to pay for that. And so being able to help sounds condescending. It's not really help, but being able to work with writers who might otherwise not have the opportunity to have that kind of support is really wonderful. So yeah, if you're just starting out, you go find the literary journals that can get you out into the world.
That got vigorous nods from everyone on, as an unknown writer, some of our listeners may have never been published before, and this is kind of a gateway to, working with an editor and finding your way into the literary world. So you've kind of already answered that question of one of the things you love about being editor-in-chief of a magazine. What else would you add to that?
Wait, sorry, my brain froze. So add it to what else I love about being an editor-in-chief or the importance of literary.
What's your job like?
Oh, my job. It's a lot of paperwork. When you're an editor-in-chief, it's like, yes, it is always a collaborative process, but it is kind of fun to have the final say, which I don't really have in any other area of my life. So So that's really a pleasure, but I have to emphasize that it is very much a collaborative. But I think, I mean, I don't think you get to be in our position unless you really love editing, which is not like it's some specialized kind of thing, but it's like it does take a lot of work and staring at the same sentences over and over again, and really kind of, I find like the challenge is working hard to make the writing that I'm editing not sound how I want it to sound, but to sound how the author intends for it to sound, but in like the best possible version of that. And so that is both a challenge, but one of the really great things that you don't experience with your own writing, because when you're editing and revising your own work, you're only thinking about you and what you want it to be. And that is like not, at least like that's not how you edit other people's work. And that is definitely something that when I first started out as an assistant at TSR, I was very much like, I know grammar and I know where these commas should go, and that's like not it at all. So yeah, that's what I would add.
Yeah. Rachel, you were saying you're relatively new on this job. What's it like? What surprised you about it?
I was sort of laughing because I think I'm still in that early honeymoon period where I am very strict about commas, and I do really feel strongly about imposing my grammatical, dictator's wand or whatever it is. No, I think what I love most is how intimate the relationship is between editor and writer. I go through several rounds with each contributor of edits, and it can get really intense, it can be a really intimate and beautiful process, especially I found when you're working on nonfiction, because that tends to be a little closer to the heart of the writer. So working on getting a piece to really efficiently and elegantly convey what it wants to convey, to mean what it wants to mean, I think is like incredibly rewarding work, and it's been really good for my own writing too. But yeah, that's not the whole job. There's also paperwork, and there's board meetings, and there's operational decisions to make, and there's interns to rally, and there's a lot of other stuff too.
Yeah, Ed, maybe you could talk a little more about that stuff. What did you do when you were working on the magazine before you took over as editor-in-chief?
So before I started, I originally started as an intern forever ago.
Were you rallied?
Yeah. And then sort of worked my way up from there. We used to have a sort of bifurcated system where there was a magazine and there was a daily. It was Guernica Daily and there was Guernica. And we published on a sort of print magazine schedule where we would have monthly issues. So I originally worked for the daily side of that. So, I would get up every morning and publish the things and copy edit things and just do the daily grind of like a daily publishing operation. And eventually was in charge of that. And then we sort of broke that barrier down a few years ago and been a senior editor. Was a senior editor since, do mostly nonfiction. I hardly ever edit fiction anymore. So that was, as Rachel said, like now I have a lot more sort of administrative and oversight duties, and spend a lot more time sort of emailing and corralling people and herding things along and making sure that thing that we talked about maybe doing actually gets done. And a little bit less of my time is spent actually editing, although it's still a big part of it. But prior to this, I was 90% of my work was like sitting down with writers, going through submissions, figuring out how to make the thing work in the best way that it could.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's talk about, sorry, that's my phone in the background. Let's talk about, mute. That's the button I'm looking for. What would you say to a young writer who dips their toe into the literary magazine world and finds that even though, Ed, you kind of build it as a niche, you know, a small but very engaged readership as a world, but even so, there's like 500 literary magazines. How do you go about thinking about them? What are some good ways to weed through and figure out which ones are for you as a reader and as potentially someone who would want to submit their work to a magazine? And Ed, why don't you pick up on that?
I mean, the easy and hard answer is like read them, but obviously that's kind of a ridiculous task. So I think one good way to find ones that you connect with is to start with writers that you know and love already and work backwards. You know, if you pick up a short story collection or something like that, you look at the copyright page in the front. It'll usually list, you know, the rights where a bunch of stories have come from different magazines, and go look at those. Look at the credits, you know, in the back. See who they're thanking, where those people are, what magazines they've been published in. And then, you know, you can sort of repeat that process through like a family tree, sort of, you know, like find a writer you love, see where they published stories, go to that magazine, find another writer you like in that magazine, see where they've published other stories, and so on and so forth. You can kind of find your way through an ecosystem that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Emily, what would you add to that?
pw.org is a really great resource. It's free and you can look up a lot of literary magazines there. There's also, you can just go to Submittable, which is an online submission platform. It's free. You can create an account. And that's how a lot of literary journals, not all, but a lot, accept submissions. And so Submittable will promote the journals that are currently open for submissions. But it's a great way to just like get a list of names. Also social media. So if you go to Twitter and you put in the Kenyon Review or Epiphany or the Paris Review or the Southampton Review or Guernica, and who's following us, literary journals follow each other. And so that's like a great way to then get into their social media feeds and see the kind of work they're promoting. We all post links to things that we have published. So it's just a really quick, easy way on your phone to do a lot of research.
Nice. Yeah. Rachel, what would you add?
Oh, it's hard to go third, isn't it? This is all really good advice, I think. I would add, well, I can send a link actually, or maybe post underneath this video. I'm not sure how this technology is going to work, but I wrote a piece for a while ago for the Submittable blog about my own submission spreadsheet, which is quite anal and thorough, which I started back in, I don't know, at the time that I wrote the piece, I started it 9 years before that. So it's very comprehensive spreadsheet. And this piece was just kind of about like how to organize your own submissions. You know, what's a good way to do that? Make sure that you keep track of the editors that you're in touch with and sort of follow. I mean, it's useful to follow their careers and see where they're moving back and forth from, you know, who have you corresponded with in the past. Just the other day, one of our readers for Epiphany mentioned that he was reading Slush at Bodega magazine when I sent them something.
Okay, stop for 1 second. What is Slush?
Okay, so the Slush is the submissions pile. So I guess it's kind of not the nicest way maybe to refer to your submissions pile, but it's a word that a lot of us use, right? And I don't mean it in any kind of degrading way, but yeah, so you develop relationships with people through the submissions process. And I think that's a useful way of thinking about it rather than sort of thinking about, is it a rejection or an acceptance? Like it's more than that. It's more than a rejection or an acceptance. It's also you're creating a relationship. You're calling people by their name. You're writing to them directly. You're following what they publish and what they're interested in, and maybe you're following their own publications. So I think about it like creating relationships.
So are most people involved in literary magazines themselves writers? Pretty much everyone. You can't nod because you won't show up. Oh, there we go. That's everyone. Now you can nod. So if you submit to a magazine, you're submitting to fellow writers, essentially. Okay, good. Tell me a little bit about the dark side. Are the things to watch out for? Are there dangers? Are there scams in the literary world? And how would a novice be able to kind of figure out, well, that's probably not for me? Sometimes I get questions about readers' fees, for example. Is that a scam to be asked to pay a reader's fee when you submit your work?
I can take this one to start, maybe. So readers' fees, people have really strong opinions about them. I would say if it's above $5, not always, but often what that means is that that journal will accept most of their work via solicitation, which means they go ask people to give them stories. So if they're charging you more than $5 to submit to the slush pile, the general submissions, they actively don't want to discourage people from submitting, because that's not where they get the majority of their work. So that's for general submissions. So I would say anything above $5, really, really think hard about that one. The other thing is, like, a lot of journals can pay, but a lot can't. So if a journal can pay you for your work and they're charging like $3 or $5 to submit, like, that to me kind of seems fair. If they can't afford to pay you, but they're charging you a reader fee, you just have to really look into your heart and think if that's the right choice for you. The other place it can get scammy is with contest fees, I think. So if the ratio of what it costs to enter a submission versus like what you could win in a prize. So if the first prize is $500, but they're charging a $20 submission fee, like, that is a ripoff. Don't do that. I would say if the top prize is $500, you shouldn't pay more than $10 to submit to that contest, and that's like even a little high. If the top prize is $1,000, 20, maybe 25, not more than that. And I think 25 is kind of high. So you just have to think about ratios. But contests, I don't know, we can get into contests later. But anyways, that's what I have to say about, like, kind of my take on the dark side of things.
Yeah. Rachel, what would you add?
I mean, I think anything that's I think what Emily's saying is right, is that you just kind of have to consider what's right for you. And, a journal that's charging a $25 submission fee is probably not worth submitting to, for most writers, because it's out of reach, regardless of what their motivations may be or who,
Well, if it is to sort of ward off unsolicited submissions, they mostly want to fill their issue with people they've reached out to and said, would you submit a story would you submit some poems? Are there other ways to tell whether a magazine is primarily interested in publishing the people it's solicited and isn't really going to look at that slush pile? Anybody? Ed, do you have any thoughts about that? How someone would be able to figure that out?
I mean, the easiest way would be to look at it and read it. If everybody in that journal went to the same school, is like demonstrably in some way friends with the people who run it, or is super famous, the odds are you're wasting your time. That a lot of it, I think, is just, exercise common sense. Take a look at these things before you send stuff to them. It should be pretty clear. I think scammers in the literary world are generally like not great at it.
You have to make a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a very low stakes scam.
So what does a contributor make? How much would a poet make for, getting 3 poems accepted to a magazine?
It varies.
Are we talking thousands or 50s or 20s?
Yeah. I mean, at TSR, it's $75 a poem, but that is like the higher end of things for sure.
Yeah, I think we pay $50 a poem for print and $25 for online publication. And then the numbers are a little different for prose. But, we're doing what we can. We're a nonprofit,
Yeah, you're not doing it for the money. You're doing it for the relationship with the community of readers and fellow writers.
I mean, I think I need to call out my predecessor, Tracy O'Neill, who established paying all of our contributors and felt very strongly that we need to do that. And I completely agree with her. So we have continued to do that, and we will continue to do that no matter what. I think paying our contributors is a huge part of our mission. We want to support writers however we can.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts before we move on to the nitty gritty of, okay, I'm ready to take the plunge. How do I submit? Well, let's move on to how do I submit? Ed, if I were submitting, what should I do?
Well, I think that depends on what you're submitting first and foremost. I have read a lot of submissions in my time. I don't know how many, like tens of thousands of them. Between Guernica, I read fiction submissions for the New Yorker for a while, and Washington Square when I was a fiction editor. That when I was in grad school, and it's very clear that a lot of people will just slap a letter together and send it to all 500 of those literary magazines you send it to, and it's very apparent when that's the case, and we all, we like to have our egos stroked a little bit for someone to tell us like why this is a fit for our particular magazine. Only because we have to read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories, and if it's clear that someone doesn't know anything about the magazine or care enough to look, then the story is probably not going to be a fit. Just the sheer numbers of the thing. So I would say first it's a little bit selfish sounding, and I know that there are the practical considerations of being able to read everything and being able, and wanting to get a story published and needing to send it to a lot of places because you're up against, a fairly intimidating like numbers game in terms of how many people are out there submitting and how many stories any particular magazine can accept and publish. But having some measure of familiarity and demonstrating that is very important, and only because you're saving yourself time in the long run by not, sending things to places that obviously are not a reasonable home for it, or that you could reasonably expect to have the best possible chance of publishing a story there. And then, just give it a quick once over for grammatical errors and spelling mistakes and stuff like that. It really colors the read of a story or something if you get it in the first sentence has like a glaring spelling error in it or something like that. So make sure you take a good look at it before you send things out and fight that impulse to sort of immediately hit send when you're done with something.
Rachel, I was browsing, the submission guidelines on websites and for magazines that, tell the authors we're looking for, so that's one way to find out what the fit would be. But they all say things like, we're looking for high quality work. We're looking for the finest literary, mastery. We're looking for, fresh, original voices. And it's very hard as a writer to, to disqualify yourself from that. It's like, well, of course I have those qualities in my work. So what do you mean when you put something like that on the website for Epiphany as opposed to some other magazine?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if we should just say, we're looking for whatever you've got. No. uh, we'll take any old thing. No. I think you get a sense of who the editor is and what they're looking for through reading the journal. I don't think there's any real shortcut to that. If you're considering submitting to like Milk Candy Review, this new online journal, which only does flash fiction, and you send them something that's 30 pages long, you're not going to get published, right? So you do sort of just have to do your homework and read these journals and familiarize yourself with them. But I think, earlier you guys were talking a little bit about taking a look at the social landscape of these journals in our network and who follows who and who's friends with whom and on social media and who's retweeting who, and you do get a sense of what the landscape looks like in terms of, it's a very interconnected network. Like Ed was talking about reading for the New Yorker and Washington Square. I read for Indiana Review. I was the fiction editor at Indiana Review years ago and been involved in other journals too. I think a lot of us have had like sort of track records through the literary landscape over the years. So just getting a sense of that, I think that really helps. And yeah, I can't undersell the importance of an accurate and concise, respectful cover letter. Just something that gets my name right and tells me that, it's not that it's a simultaneous submission, but it'll be withdrawn if it's accepted elsewhere. Like, beautiful. With bio
Explain what that is. What is simultaneous submission? What does that mean?
Right. So some journals will not take simultaneous submissions. That's another sort of, that'll hint to you that they may not be worth your time to submit to, because they may mostly take solicitations if they don't do simultaneous submissions, or they're, so sort of like high end that they may be out of my league, for instance. So you want to assure your journal that you're submitting to that you are going to withdraw it from the other journals where it's on submission if it's accepted somewhere else. So just like a quick line at the bottom of your cover letter that says, I'll withdraw this if it's accepted elsewhere, like it is on simultaneous submission. It's just it's a polite way to tell the editor that you understand the nature of their job. You'll be respectful and of their time. You're not going to have them read something that was just accepted somewhere else that'll waste, an hour of their life or whatever it is. So, yeah, that's what.
And then your blog post about staying organized sounds like one of the things somebody who's sending their work out needs to be organized about is if they get something accepted, they need to right away tell any other magazine they sent it to,
Right.
This piece has been accepted elsewhere, so please withdraw it from consideration.
Right.
One good reason to stay organized, because everyone would hope to have that problem. That's a great problem to have as somebody who's sending out work, right? And Emily, you had talked earlier briefly about how working on the editorial side of a magazine helps with revision. Talk a little bit more about the cover letter, if you would, and whether that has an art to it that is helpful to a writer. Does that make sense? That's the question.
I generally agree with Rachel. It does not have to be book length, just a short letter outlining what you're submitting, poems, an essay, the titles or title, the word count, and if it's a simultaneous submission, thank you for considering my work, sign off. I should probably not say this, but one of the things I do really love about reading general submissions are the cover letters, because you get some out there cover letters. And I would hate if they all became uniform, and I would miss out on like learning that this essay had been submitted by the woman who was in charge of marketing broccolini in like the 1980s to American supermarkets, which is a thing. So, and not everyone, like, again, has like an education or the kind of like background or support systems where they get told like, here's how you write a cover letter. So for me, there's a lot of leeway. Having said that, a cover letter is a pretty good indication of what I'm going to see when I open the submission, which is why we try to read the submissions first and then look at the cover letters after. But you really, less is better, you know, like just less is better. Dear Emily, I'm submitting this fiction story XYZ of 1,200 words for your consideration. It's a simultaneous submission. If accepted elsewhere, I will notify you and withdraw it immediately. Thanks so much. And that's it. That's all it has to be. But if you don't quite get that, that's like, if that's not quite what your style is, that's fine. I just, usually writers will include a bio of some sort, some biographical information. And I would just like discourage, even though I love reading them, like, I don't think it's going to help you if you're like, my plant's name is Harry and I live with my 10 cats and I like going for walks with my 10 cats, whatever it is. Like, we see a lot of that. It won't help you, but it makes my day.
So keep the biographical information. I mean, if you don't really have anything to say, like you're an unpublished writer, should you just leave it off?
I mean, I think, you know, so if you don't read the journal itself, definitely go read something on their website. It will say what they're looking for. And a lot of journals really put it front and center. Like, we love publishing debut authors. We encourage emerging writers. So if that's you, you may want to like say, if accepted, this will be my first piece of fiction, or this will be my first publication. Definitely some journals, us included, really like that.
Awesome. So from the live chat,
bio or like a lot of. Oh, sorry. No, my computer just glitched out. You're good. I'm done.
All right. Okay. From the live chat, Tyler Allen Penny has a question. Actually, a couple of them. What are common mistakes you see writers making beyond maybe typo in the first sentence that Ed mentioned, or, you know, extraneous information that might be amusing to Emily, but it's probably not relevant to the submission? What might be another common mistake? And curious to hear how, whether someone who's never been published before should maybe hold off on sending their work to top tier publications. They should maybe look for publications that say we encourage emerging authors, as you said. Any other advice around those two things? Rachel, how about you?
I think those are good questions, and actually sort of sounds like the answers are in there. I think looking for journals that embrace debut authors is a good idea. Common mistakes is hard to say. I mean, mistakes are all relative, right? And I might look at something and say, well, this is clearly an early draft and needs to be, you know, it needs to go through a few more rounds of revision. And some other editor might look at it and say, oh, I love how raw it is. This is fantastic. It's ready to go. So it's really hard to say. This is a very, very subjective business. And I would hate to tell people to, you know, avoid mistakes and pitfalls when really I think the biggest mistake you can make is not sending your work out if you really want people to read it. You know, send it out, take the risk, get rejected. It's fine. It happens to all of us, move on, do it again. Like, I think that's the best advice I can give.
Ed, you're smiling. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know how you define a mistake in this context, really. Like you were saying, I think if you want to send it out to top tier publications, which I guess the Atlantic, the New Yorker, the Paris Review, however you want to define them, you can. Lots of people do. You know that the odds are not great, even in the best of circumstances. But there's no reason not to do it if you don't mind spending the time and I don't know, trying to write the cover letters, getting anxious about it and bothering yourself, wondering when you're going to get a response. But I think, I would encourage you to think critically about why you want to do that, like why you want to send out, why you're worried about mistakes, why do you need to be submitting right now? Like, do you just want to keep working on it? What is the impetus for wanting to get a story published in the first place? Because it's really not a race, and it's really not that big of like professional milestone when you get right down to it. It's hard to fight the impulse to feel like, oh, when my book comes out, oh, when I get a story published, it's going to change everything. I'm going to be a published writer, and all of a sudden, you have that institutional credibility, which is great, sure, but it really doesn't make that big of a practical difference. I've worked at publishing houses, I've worked in magazines, I've read a lot of submissions. It never makes that much of a difference to me. If I look at a cover letter and it says, I've been published in X, Y, and Z, and you'll see these cover letters a lot with folks who are sending stories out and they'll say, I've been published in, and then there's a list of like 40 journals. And, that doesn't say anything to me except that this person has a lot of free time, and can send out a ton of stories. And, it doesn't make a difference in my decision making. What makes a difference in my decision making is reading a story that I really like, whether it's by an emerging author or by a really established one. The important thing is always whether or not I enjoy the work and connect with it and have a vision for it. So, you don't need to be out there selling stories to every magazine under the sun in order to get ahead. Like, keep working on them, keep writing them. You don't need that in your bio to sell a book. You don't need that in your bio to sell a story. And if you're really that worried about it, maybe you don't need to do it right now. Maybe you need to feel a little bit more secure about your work.
Right. Yeah. So that's fascinating. So I'll turn to you, Emily. What was, how did you answer that question for yourself and say, why am I am ready to send out to magazines? What was that threshold for you?
I had a really good story that I had written, and I knew it was really good. It's still probably one of the things I've ever written. It's still probably one of the things I've ever written. It was time to go out. So I just, it was something that, I think when you have something and you really feel strongly about it, and I would say the most important thing is you have shown it to other people. Writing does not happen in a vacuum. You have gotten feedback from other people that you trust that, yes, this is a good story. No, I don't see any obvious typos. You bring it to other people, you get their feedback, you assimilate that with your own thoughts. And then if you still feel good about it, you send it out. But this was a story I'd written for my undergraduate thesis in creative writing. So it had been workshopped for months and months and months. This was not, and I will say it is possible to write a really great story in a weekend and get that published. I think that happens a lot less often. So this was a story that I had gotten significant feedback on. I'd been working on it for months, and it was time for it to go out into the world. So that's when I decided to submit it.
Yeah. Rachel, how about you? What was your threshold?
The very first story I published, I gave a reading at what was it called? The New York State Summer Writers Institute, which is a great resource, especially for students, because they take you can attend for free, I think, or for a deep discount if you're a student. So I went for a couple of weeks between years of grad school and gave a little reading. All the students gave a reading, and somebody heard this story that I read and said, "Oh, you should submit to this journal I read for." So that was really exciting. It was the first time I'd ever been invited to submit anywhere, and it turned out to be my very first story publication. And through publishing there, that was in Hobart. Through publishing in Hobart, I got to know a few other online literary journals, and I got really excited about sending work out, and things sort of grew from there. So that was 10 years ago.
Hey. I mean, I was going to ask about rejection letters and handling rejection, but I think this is a really smart way to think about it. Like, if rejection letters loom large in your mind, you probably should ask yourself, why am I even submitting this story or these poems, right?
I feel like people need to know what the volume is to just contextualize the rejection letter. I mean, we receive sometimes 2,000 stories in a reading period, right? So and we publish 10 at the most, maybe more like 7 or 6, depending on how long they are. So a rejection letter we try to be as encouraging as we can. We really appreciate that people take us seriously and want to be published in our pages. Like, that's an incredible position to be in, and we never take it for granted. And I try to communicate that in my letters of when I decline work. But for the most part, when you look at those numbers, like, a rejection is not the end of the world. Like, it's going to be most pieces that get rejected, and a lot of really good pieces will get rejected, and that's fine. They'll find a home eventually, And speaking from my own experience, I have found that, like, sometimes the story that I've worked on for 5 or 6 years, like Emily's saying, will eventually find a home after I've sent it out and revised it and sent it out again and then revised it again and then sent it out again. I mean, it's a whole process, right? And I think the process is what you make of it. And if you treat it like a way of becoming a better writer, you're going to have a much more fruitful experience than if you treat it like, oh no, I got rejected again. Like, it's not that simple,
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of questions from the chat. Ephraim asks, is it acceptable to publish pieces anonymously or with a pseudonym?
Yeah.
Emily?
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of, not a lot, but definitely some authors want to use a pen name, and that's totally up to them. I mean, we have to know their legal names so we can send them a check, but we publish under whatever name they want, as long as it's not inappropriate.
Any other thoughts on that? Awesome. And then
fiction, nonfiction, that becomes an issue for various reasons.
Oh, good point.
Wait, do you mind? Sorry, Ed, can you say more about that? I guess I've never encountered that with nonfiction, but what would be the consideration there?
Well, there would be concerns in any sort of journalistic context. We would need like a reason for doing that, for withholding the author's identity, depending on the nature of the piece and the circumstances of the piece.
Okay, well, actually, we're going to stick with you, Ed, because you seem to have a good legal mind. This is from Lauren. When a journal wants to publish a piece of yours, are you still the owner of the piece, or do they own it? Are there any restrictions to the amount of journals one piece can be published in, and why?
That is a contractual issue that will differ slightly from publication to publication. When someone accepts a story, generally speaking, they will send you a contract that you will then sign that includes information about, how much they're going to pay you, deadlines, whatever, stuff like that, all the practical stuff. And it will also include information about the rights that you are surrendering to that publication in order to allow them to publish it, right? So we, for example, generally take what's called first serial rights, which is the first, publication of a piece in English. Usually it's delineated by language or by geography. Since so much of this is on the internet now, it's generally by language. So, there's like North American rights, World English, stuff like that. So there's also TV rights, there's radio rights, audio rights, film rights, and all that stuff. Generally, a magazine will take just first serial rights. So after they publish it, we retain the right to have it on our website in perpetuity. But after that, the rights revert to you as the writer, generally speaking. So then, if you want to sell it as part of a short story collection or whatever, you can do that. Usually it's stipulated that you have to include some sort of like credit to the magazine it was originally published in when it's published in book form. But generally speaking, we don't retain the rights to the story forever, so that you wouldn't be able to take it and make a book out of it or make a movie out of it or whatever. But you should always read those contracts, because some places do. Some places will retain rights for stuff like that. And that's also something that, if you're working with an agent, sometimes you will give those rights to the agency. The agency will then be able to sell those rights, and then you would get a percentage of that, and they would get a percentage of that. So it depends a lot on the particular circumstances. There are services that will look at contracts and stuff like that for you. That I don't remember the names of off the top of my head, but they exist if you have questions about them.
And why is it set up that way, where then basically the magazine retains that first serial? Why is that important to the magazine? Why does the magazine care that you're not publishing it in two other places?
Because we want people to read our magazine. Part of it is, we get revenue from advertising. We sell advertising based on the number of people who are visiting the site. If you can see and read that piece elsewhere, then you're not coming to read it here, which, we spent time and effort and energy and our labor to edit that piece and to copy edit that piece and to format that piece and to find artwork to run with that piece. It's a collaborative effort once a place has accepted a piece like that. So, we want people to read it in the context that we constructed for it, and and on its behalf. We've worked to make it the best version of that thing that we think it could be. So, I think it's a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, thanks. Josh asks, as editors, how do you determine the appropriate ratio of solicited to slush publications? So pieces that you ask somebody to submit versus pieces you're getting out of the slush pile. Rachel, why don't you speak to that?
Yeah, I think it differs, at least in my limited experience. It's differed per issue so far. But we feel really strongly, Epiphany has a strong history of taking a lot of work from submissions, and we feel really strongly, it goes along with our mission of supporting writers who are particularly early in their careers. So the percentage of solicited material is actually pretty low in Epiphany, but that also changes depending on, if we have a guest editor, they might feel differently about that. Currently, we have a guest poetry editor. I don't know what her percentage of solicitations are actually. So yeah, it sort of it depends on the editorial, I don't know, on the background and perspectives of the person themselves. But personally, I feel strongly about taking a lot of work from the submissions pile. I think we only have 2 or 3 solicitations in the forthcoming issue.
And that's the themed one on Borders. Yeah.
At
Okay.
least on the prose side, I should say.
On the prose side. Okay, Emily, what about you? How do you set that ratio?
It's kind of the same as Rachel. It really depends on the issue. So Amy Hempel is our fiction editor, Cornelius Eady is our poetry editor. So they put asks out to people they know. But not everyone has a story or a poem that's ready to go. So for this issue, there is almost no solicited work. But then maybe some of the people Amy and Cornelius asked, in the past few months will get back to us in August, and we'll have some pieces for the next issue. So, but we always definitely take a significant amount from submittable, because otherwise what would be the point of even accepting general submissions?
Yeah. Yeah. A question from your Paralexi Kelly. With regard to those really good stories that get rejected, how often are you as editors able to provide even a smidgen of personalized feedback or encouragement in your rejection letter? And then there's a postscript with the spelling of smidgen corrected because it was spelled G-E-O-N instead of G-E-N. And the wonderful comment, I may have inadvertently created a portmanteau of smidgen and pigeon just now. But the question is about personalized feedback on a story that's really good, but you have 1,999 other ones, and that's not going to be one of the 10 that makes it into a magazine, for example, using Rachel's numbers. Who wants to start on that? Emily, let's start with you and we'll work backward to Ed.
Okay, so there's actually a website called rejection.wiki, which is really interesting. It is all self-reported, but it lists the rejection letters that people have gotten from different literary journals. And what you'll see if you go there and look at it is there are different tiers of rejections. So there's like the form letter, sorry, thank you, no luck. And then there's like maybe a slightly higher tier, which we have at the Southampton Review, which is, this isn't for us, but we really liked your writing. Please consider submitting to us again. So we send, I guess, in a reading period, we get 2,000 submissions, let's say. We're going to send maybe, I wouldn't even say 20, maybe like 15 of that higher tier. And then there's like the personalized rejection. And I think I'm at the point where like, if I'm giving someone personal rejection, it's because I do want to see a read of the story. It's because I'm willing to work with that author. So it's less of a rejection, more like, here's some feedback. If this makes sense to you and you want to do the work, I'd love to look at another draft and like consider it. So it's not really rejection. It's more like, let's begin this relationship if this seems like something you want to do. And I would say that maybe happens twice in a reading period.
Yeah, Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, so I think to sort of contextualize, it's maybe useful to look at the number of volunteer readers we have. So we have like 20 people reading for us at any given time. And so every single piece gets read in the submissions queue. And then when a piece is upvoted, so each reader provides a synopsis and then feedback and some, like a paragraph of notes explaining why they voted the way that they did in submittable. When a piece is upvoted, it gets read by another reader. And if it's upvoted again, it gets read by yet another reader. And then it gets to me. So it's a pretty intensive process. So by the time we're getting to personalized rejections, I mean, I do use the form rejection, but I do also personalize it. So I'll add a line or two that says, by the way, I really enjoyed this piece, or, I found it very whatever, XYZ. But if you're getting that from me, that means I read your story. You know what I mean? So for the most part, most pieces will not get that. It's true. But every piece will get read and every piece will have some feedback. Whether or not that's going to be useful to the writer, I don't know, but it's there, it exists.
Have you ever thought about making those readers' comments available to the submitter?
We have thought about it, but it's not, it would be so much labor, and this is unpaid labor that these volunteer readers are doing to sort of make those comments, you know, sort of word them beautifully and make them palatable and polite. And, you know, not that we get, you know, the most unpalatable, impolite notes on the back end. I mean, all of our readers are wonderful and they all have intelligent things to say. They wouldn't be working with us otherwise. But yeah, this is internal stuff.
Yeah. Ed, how about you?
I think the really important thing to bear in mind when you're looking at rejections in general is that a rejection is not necessarily a rejection per se. You know, there certainly is that tiered system. You know, there's the standard, no, sorry, you know, we received a lot of submissions, you know, wish you the best of luck. And then there's the, you know, one notch up kind of thing. And then there's one notch up from that. And then there's getting a letter from somebody directly. And I had an old mentor at grad school who said, you know, the way that this works, and then having been on the flip side of it since, I think it's very much the case that, you know, the way that it works with any given magazine is you send them a story, they say no. You send them another story, they say no, but like with a slight Mona Lisa smile. And then you send them another story and then they say, this isn't a good fit, but thanks for sending it. And then you send them another story and they say, let's talk. You know, like it is very much like the building up of a relationship over time. Every once in a while you will get it where somebody, you know, you send something or somebody sends a story the first time to a place and they take it and publish it and it's great. But that is an extraordinarily rare thing. You're entering into a relationship with a writer. You're entering into what is sometimes like a years long process of working together towards the publication of something. You're working together on something that is sometimes like financially involved, depending on the magazine that you're talking about. So, you know, establishing that relationship over time, coming to understand a person's work and the places it comes from, that informs your decision as an editor, as someone who's reading their work and becoming more familiar with it as a body of work over time. So like, you don't necessarily want somebody to take the first story because they might not know what to do with it in the way that they would, you know, after they've read 4 or 5 of your stories and found that one to be the one that particularly works for them, that particularly works for their magazine, and they know what to do with it. Sometimes, you know, it's not a judgment on you, it's in the service of your work to have those relationships and dynamics play out over time over the course of multiple submissions. So don't, you know, I would just say don't think of it as like a yes or a no, or like, you know, I'm on stage 1, now I got to get to stage 2 or whatever. Just think of it as, and I would say this, you know, across the board with respect to a lot of these questions is don't think about these things in terms of like discrete points on like on a journey to a set destination, right? You're on a trajectory. And there's no like stopping and starting points along that. You're just like time moves forward, these things move on. Like there's no discrete, like now I've done it, now I've won, now I failed because I got a rejection. Like that is not a meaningful way to conceive of this process.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. You guys are so generous with your time speaking about these issues. I really can't thank you enough. We have one more question I see on the chat that I'm going to ask you. If anyone else on the chat would like to throw a question in the ring, we're getting down toward the end of our time. But this follows up on this idea of a relationship that unfolds over time. From Sebastian, do publications keep a record of past stories you've submitted that have gotten rejected?
Well, they're insubmittable. I mean, the stories coming to us are insubmittable, so they're all archived. So There are names that I recognize every submission period. They submit to us every submission period. So I can click on that submitter's name and see all the previous stories that they've sent us. So yes, it exists.
Yeah, Rachel, do you have that same sort of archival?
Yeah, it's just automatic in the back end of Submittable, so which we also use.
Yep, and you as well, Ed?
Yeah, pretty much anybody using like an online submissions management system will be able to do that automatically.
It's interesting, especially like when we do end up finally accepting something from that person, to go look at maybe like what they'd sent us previously. And some of them definitely are people we've encouraged to submit to us again because we liked what they had written, but it just, that one wasn't for us, and then the next thing they send is. So it's a good record.
And going back to cover letters, you should say in a cover letter if you received like an encouraging note in the past, or if a specific person told you to submit again, put that in the cover letter.
Yep.
Yeah, that's your opening sentence. Thank you for encouraging me to submit again. Right? Yeah. Oh, you guys, you're doing amazing work. You're keeping a literary community connected, readers and writers back and forth. From the chat, we have thank you all for your thoughtful and expansive responses. Thank you all so much for your time and insightful advice. I really appreciate it, and I learned so much from you all. This was informative and helpful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, great, thank you, great, informative, thank you, great. There seems to be a villanelle in there somewhere. But I just, on behalf of Stony Brook's Creative Writing and Film Program, we could not have asked for a more just informative, great conversation with you all. And I also want to thank you for, improvising in a time of COVID-19 and making this happen, even though it's not on the originally scheduled date. And here you all are virtually, and we're so appreciative. Thanks
Really.
again.
Having us.
Thank you.